Hello, Simon Rainier, Links Armazzare, and it's another one of my Mead days, and I thought I would walk people through some tips for making your very first mead. There are probably three main types of people watching this. People who watch all my stuff, you're great, keep doing that. People who have never made mead before, which is sort of the target audience, and people who have made lots of mead and kind of want to check up on what mistakes I'm making. And that's also fine because I do the same thing. What I want you to do, though, is if we can agree on a simple principle of your first mead will not be your best mead, I think we're going to get along great. I'm going to divide this into three main sections. We have the before, the during, and the after. We have sort of the planning and recipe building stage, which is the before. The during is the actual, like, putting everything together. And then the after is the aging, fermenting. Mead takes time. So, right away, first piece of advice for basically anyone getting into it, try not to buy your equipment new. I got like 10 of these things, and a hydrometer, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, all the airlocks, a siphoning tube, and a bunch of bottles, all for $10 off of like Kijiji. Making alcohol is one of those things that people tend to do once or twice, and then their gear sits in a garage for the next like year until they eventually give it away or sell it for dirt cheap. So you can usually find stuff for cheap. I don't think I've paid full price for any of the equipment I own, with the possible exception of I think I got one of these for like $10 when I was just desperate to have another one. But yeah, you'll need those. You'll need airlocks. Most kinds I find around here are these little 3-piece bubbler jobs. They work just fine. The ones I prefer are, hang on, as I have a mead room around the corner, this kind, personal preference thing, they both work fine. When it comes to sort of like finding your, figuring out what you want to do and how you want to do it, I can also highly recommend this book here. I have things like stashed like all over the place, so I can just reach out and grab them. It's great. Make Mead Like a Viking by Jeremy Zimmerman. Fantastic book. Really gets things going in a nice sort of simple, easy to understand, easy to grasp way. Really highly recommend that book. Takes a lot of the stress out of it, which is exactly what I'm trying to do. That's sort of the before. As you in the during, as you're putting together a recipe, I have a rule of thumb. For every 1% of alcohol per gallon is 100 grams of honey. I like a dry mead at about 10%. 1 kilo of honey in one of these finishes off dry at 9 or 10%. That guideline is plus or minus a percent, depending on kind of a whole host of different factors. But it's fairly reliable for me. 1 kilo of honey, 10% alcohol. If I'm making one of my small meads, half that, 500 grams of honey, 5% alcohol. Then I carbonate it. It's awesome. There's a video on that. Go find it. When it comes to any kind of extra, when it comes to when you're putting it together, add something. A cup of strongly brewed black tea at the very, very base level. Before I did that, there was always kind of a missing note, kind of like almost a hollow point in the flavor profile. As soon as I added that black tea into it, it filled that hole and made everything better. When it comes to like flavoring additions and so forth, any kind of fruit, this one is my spruce tip mead, which I'm thinking is almost ready to rack. One of the things I'm going to be doing today is testing that. Spruce tips. When it comes to fresh fruit, I add 500 grams of fruit per gallon. When it comes to sort of like dried tea-like things, This one has meadow sweet in it. It's 5 grams, steeped into a tea and just pitched in. Same with my elderflower, 5 grams per gallon. Play with it, figure out what works for you. I find 500 grams of fruit leads to a solid like fruit flavor without being overwhelming all of the honey notes as well. But feel free to like start simple, like a simple traditional mead, honey, black tea, yeast, water. I always add some sort of nutrient in it. Diammonium phosphate, DAP, is sort of like the preferred one. But again, if you're just starting out, it's not necessary. It'll probably take a little longer. Maybe it'll stall. Maybe it won't. You know what? You're playing with it. Don't get stressed out. Don't get all these powders that you're not necessarily going to need. At the very base level, I like you throwing in, like, if I'm being lazy, a teaspoon of diammonium phosphate as I'm mixing it up, and then just that's it. There's something called like a staggered yeast nutrient addition. I don't know. There's an acronym for it, but it's complicated, and I don't want to talk about it. Because again, we are ignoring best practices here for our first mead, and then hopefully what that does is when you realize how simple it is, you'll want to make more, you'll want to read more about it, and you want to make it as best as you possibly can, and that's when you can start deciding how many extra additions and nutrients and everything like that you want to add in. For the beginning, keep it simple. Don't do anything extra. It'll be fine. Bread yeast also works. Again, like if you don't want to buy like fancy yeasts and fancy ingredients, keeping it super simple is okay, especially for your first one. Toss in a kilo of honey, fill up to like that level with water, teaspoon of yeast, shake it all up and leave it alone. You will make mead. It won't be the best mead, but you will make mead. What did I say before? Your first mead is not going to be your best mead. It's okay. Anything else during? I hadn't mentioned this before. Make sure you sanitize everything. That's the one thing that's probably super important. Yeah, figure out sanitization. But that's pretty simple. It's not, doesn't have to be scary. Don't be too strict about your sanitization as well. Like you don't. Not everything has to be entirely sterilized. It's okay. People have been making mead for tens of thousands of years without modern sanitization processes. Yes, you might get an infection in your mead, but you might not. Right? Keep it clean. That's the main thing. With that as well, a little tip is like I was really worried at one point about like my homemade meads making me sick. Don't worry about it. Everything I've read, every like solid thing I've read is as long as it doesn't taste absolutely wretched, it's not going to make you any more sick than any other alcohol, any other like commercially produced alcohol. You won't die from drinking mead. If it tastes like crap or if it's covered in mold, don't drink it. It's fine. Yeah, you're not going to die. As to the sort of like after stages, you want to leave it alone in one of these things until it's totally done fermenting. How do you know that for sure? You get a hydrometer, one of these dealies, and you learn how to use it. If you're making just a mead for funsies and you don't know if you're ever going to do it again, you're probably not going to want to do that. You're probably not going to want to buy one of those. Again, they're not expensive. They're like $15. Here's a lot of people judge it by how many bubbles are coming up through the airlock. I don't have really an active ferment going on right now, otherwise I'd show you that. That's not super reliable though. What I do find relatively reliable is the clarity. This is my Acerglyn or maple syrup mead. You can see my hand quite clearly through it. This is done fermenting. I know that. I tested it a week ago. And it is, yeast is done. There's no more sugar left for the yeast to drink. This is my spruce tip mead. It's cloudier. I suspect it might be done. And I'm going to do a hydrometer reading of it. If I didn't have a hydrometer, I would wait another few weeks and to see if it got to this level of clarity. And that's pretty good indication that all the fermentation is done, in my experience. Again, like I tested this like a week or so ago. There's nothing wrong with leaving it. Like, leave it longer. This has been going for a little over a month. April 29th, it's June something. June 8th? June 8th, it's June 8th today. Happy June 8th. So yeah, like a month and a week. 6 weeks, 2 months. It's fine. It's fine. Don't be in a rush to rack. Don't be in a rush to move it off to another container. What I'm going to be doing with this one today is going to be moving it to another container, and because it needs a little something, I'm going to add some lemon zest because I think it needs that sort of citrus. Little acid, as they say. As you are racking it, it's a great time to taste it and sort of figure out what it needs. You're not going to know that right away. Add stuff to it, play with it, see what works. Again, if you want to be sure it's done fermenting, rack it over, or sure it's done fermenting, get a hydrometer before you rack it. If you don't have a hydrometer or don't want to get one, I was talking to a buddy of mine who's doing stuff and said, yeah, maybe get a hydrometer. It's like, nah, he makes wine like once a year, so it's not really worth it to him to get it. And I get that. If it goes clear, probably nothing is happening. What you're going to be doing is down at the bottom, there's the lees, the sort of like sediment layer. You're just going to rack, use a siphon to tube it off into another container, another one of these, and let that sort of sit and settle out, and then after that, bottle it. I will, as sort of a generalized rule of thumb, 6 weeks in primary, and then another month at least in the next bottle in secondary, and then usually by that point it's fine to bottle. My sort of other rule is taste as you go. Little like turkey baster, take a little sample out, taste it. I had one that was like tasted like very alcohol, and I kept tasting it like once a week, and then eventually it started tasting good, and that's when I bottle it. Is when it tastes good. Yeah. Is there anything else I think you need to know? Not really. Get your stuff secondhand, mix up a batch, leave it for 6 weeks in a bottle, move it to a new bottle, leave it another 6 weeks, maybe. Put it in like proper bottles, drink and enjoy. People will say you need to wait like 6 months a year for mead. You don't. The higher alcohol percentage it is, the longer you will have to wait. My small meads, my 5% carbonated meads, takes me 9 days to make. That's from mixing to bottling to drinking. 9 days. These ones take a few months, and they are delicious. You can leave longer. Longer is probably better. But if you're like me, you're kind of impatient. So, with that, I'm going to switch the camera off. I'm going to test these, see if I need to rack all of them, and then just kind of get to meeting. So, hopefully this is helpful. Hopefully this has made things less scary. Yeah. Ignore best practices for start. Just do it. Mead wants to be made. Mead is super simple. Let it ride. See ya.